This is not something that a decent human being could do.
A single forgotten hard drive, one careless sale, and suddenly a story that was never supposed to exist begins tearing through the silence like a controlled explosion, exposing whispers, patterns, and intentions that some say were hidden in plain sight all along. Because what if this was never a love story? What if it was something far colder, far more calculated, and far from over? It started quietly, too quietly. A closed restaurant in Toronto, the kind of place where secrets once moved as smoothly as wine glasses across polished tables, equipment being cleared, systems wiped, or at least that's what should have happened. But buried inside those abandoned machines was something no one expected to resurface. Data, messages, conversations frozen in time. And not just any conversations, but ones tied directly to Meghan Markle, preserved like evidence waiting for the right moment to breathe again. And then came the mistake. A single oversight that changed everything. An old laptop, a backup hard drive, sold without a second thought. No wipe, no protection, just handed over like it meant nothing. But the moment that device powered on in a stranger's home, the silence shattered. Because what appeared on that screen wasn't ordinary. It was layered, personal, detailed, a timeline that didn't just suggest ambition, it mapped it. Messages, emails, schedules, patterns forming between lines. A relationship documented not just in memories, but in cold, undeniable digital trails. And buried inside those files, something even more unsettling. A blueprint, step by step, not chaotic, not accidental. Structured, directed, as if every move had already been considered long before anyone else realized the game had even begun. And that's when the tone of this entire story shifts. Because this wasn't just about a past relationship. It wasn't just about Meghan Markle and a former partner. It was about timing, about overlap, about what was being planned while another life was still unfolding in parallel, living under the same roof yet looking somewhere else, reaching towards something bigger, something far beyond Toronto, something that, according to these records, pointed directly toward Prince Harry. So ask yourself, this coincidence or calculation? Because the person who found these files didn't stay silent. No, the discovery became currency, value, opportunity, and within hours, whispers began to circulate. Small at first, then louder, then impossible to ignore. Tabloid doors knocked, offers made, and suddenly what was once hidden inside a forgotten hard drive started leaking into the public bloodstream. And here's where it becomes impossible to ignore the pattern. The speed, the spread, the reaction. Because before the full story even surfaced, before the details could settle, one name reportedly reacted faster than anyone else: Prince William. Not publicly, not loudly, but decisively. Quiet movements, immediate attention, as if the implications were already understood before the headlines could even catch up. Why such urgency? Because if even a fraction of those files were real, then this wasn't just gossip. It was a narrative that could rewrite everything people thought they knew. And then comes the moment that raises even more questions than answers. A direct message, not speculation, not silence. A response sent across continents, sharp, controlled, and impossible to misread. A demand for clarity, for explanation, for truth. And yet, what came back? Nothing, no reply, no denial, just silence. And in a story like this, silence doesn't calm anything. It amplifies it. Because when words disappear, people start looking at actions, at timing, at what's missing. And suddenly, every detail begins to feel like a clue instead of a coincidence. So what exactly was inside those files that triggered such a fast and controlled reaction? The silence didn't hold. It couldn't, because while the world was still trying to process the first wave of whispers, something else crashed into the story louder, sharper, and far more personal. Not from anonymous sources, not from hidden files, but from someone who claimed to have seen everything from the inside. And that's when the narrative stopped being distant and started feeling uncomfortably close. A man identifying himself as connected to the chef stepped forward, and suddenly the story gained a voice, not speculation testimony, detailed, direct, and impossible to ignore. Because what was described wasn't just a past connection, it was something ongoing, something that blurred timelines and raised uncomfortable questions about what was really happening behind closed doors. According to that statement, Meghan Markle had never truly cut the line. Calls, messages, contact that never fully ended, even after stepping into a completely different world alongside Prince Harry. And that's where the tension sharpens, because it wasn't just about staying in touch, it was about intent, requests being made, pressure being applied, the suggestion suggestion that professional boundaries were being pushed again and again, not casually, but persistently. Meetings happening quietly, conversations happening away from public view, and every refusal met with another attempt, another push, another moment that refused to disappear into the past. Then comes the shift that turns suspicion into something heavier. Evidence, not just words, but images. Candid photographs pulled from angles that weren't meant to be seen. Moments captured without announcement, without permission, without preparation. And in those frames, according to the claims, gestures that didn't look casual, didn't look distant, didn't look like something that had truly ended. But even that wasn't the most unsettling part, because alongside those images came something far more deliberate. Handwritten letters. Personal, direct, impossible to dismiss as accidental. And inside those letters, intentions laid out with a clarity that left little room for interpretation. Requests for introductions, for access, for connections that stretched beyond one life into another network entirely. And buried within those lines, a detail that changes the entire tone of the story preparation. Not for success, but for exit. A plan that suggested a future already being considered in case everything collapsed. So now the question isn't whether something happened, it's how long it had been unfolding. Because as this second wave hit, the reaction didn't stabilize, it exploded. Public debate turned into full-scale outrage. Conversations multiplied, narratives hardened. And in the middle of all of it, Meghan Markle finally broke the silence. A statement released quickly, firmly, rejecting everything. Every image dismissed, every letter denied, every claim labeled as fabrication. But here's where the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. The timing, the pressure, the response coming only after the story had already taken shape. And for many watching, the denial didn't slow anything down. It accelerated it, because by that point, people weren't just listening to statements, they were comparing them against the files, against the testimony, against the sequence that had already been laid out piece by piece. And then the atmosphere changes again, because while the public storm grew louder, something else was happening quietly, precisely, and with unmistakable intent. The situation had moved beyond reaction. It had entered control. A final step, a final message. Not open, not broadcast, but direct. And according to the sequence, that message didn't carry negotiation, it carried warning.